Well, Jessica, would you like me to get started while
Yeah,
you
why don't
track
you
down
kick us
Erin's
off
situation?
and I'll see if I can track down a note from Erin.
Sounds good. Well, good to see everyone. Welcome to the March 22nd, 2022 Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting. I am standing in for Howe today with facilitation as the vice chair of OBPAC. She is not in attendance, so helping cover. With that, we'll jump right in and do introductions and agenda review. So I'd like to just hear from the OBPAC members verbally, a brief introduction, sharing your name, your preferred pronouns, and where you reside. And then for those of you who are listening in from community or ODOT staff, please put in the chat box a brief introduction of your name, title if you have it, just any affiliation and your interest in relation to OBPAC. So to kick it off, let's start with Mavis.
Hi, I'm Mavis Hartz. I live in the Grand, and I am the retail portion of OBPAC. And I have been going to the Safe Routes to School and the Planning Commission. And there's one other thing that I've been taking care of for this group, but I can't remember what it is right now. So, hi, on to the next.
Transportation plan?
The P, yeah, the big one for Oregon. Yeah, they're very, very large meetings.
Thanks, Mavis.
Yeah.
Bill.
Hi, my name is Bill Richard. I'm 75 years old. I have Parkinson's disease and I'm an avid biker. It's the biking that helps me combat the Parkinson's disease, and I'm proud to be a voice for old people and people with severe illnesses.
Thank you, Bill. And what area of the state do you live in?
I'm in East Marland in Portland.
Wonderful, thanks so much. Robert.
Hi, my name's Robert Spurlock, and my gender pronouns are he, him, his, and I live in Southeast Portland. I'm the Recreation Trails representative on OBPAC. Nice to see everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Lauren?
Hi, Lauren Morris. I live in Coos County, and my gender pronouns are, I don't know, she, her, that girl, I'm not sure. Anyhow, I think that's all you were asking for, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Wonderful. And I am Emma Newman. I am the vice chair of OBPAC. I am an at-large member on OBPAC living in Springfield, Oregon. My day job is as the senior transportation planner for the city of Springfield, but I am on OBPAC just as a Oregonian here to serve. And welcome, Erin. Glad you could make it. We were just doing brief introductions. So your name, your preferred pronouns, where you reside, and if there's anything else you want to share, feel free to toss that in, but basically the basics.
Everyone, my name is Aaron. I am currently a third-year student at Oregon State University studying civil engineering. I'm originally from Phoenix, Oregon, so that's where I'm at right now, actually on spring break, but I spend most of my time in Corvallis going to school there, and I am the under 21 chair here on OBPAC. Sorry for getting a little late. I try to fit as many appointments as I can while I'm home, and it just ran a little late, but is anyone else have left to go?
You made it. No, we have all introduced ourselves, and then folks who are listening in are just adding their intros in the chat box. So I'd like to open up the agenda review. I have one item to add, but any other committee members see any adjustments or additions, deletions from the agenda that you'd like to bring forward at this time? I'll share mine and give you another moment to think. So I attended an electric micromobility listening session yesterday on behalf of OBPAC. So I'd like to provide a brief update on that under the committee business section. That's the only adjustment I have at this time. Not seeing anyone else speaking up or having concerns. So let's consider our agenda approved. Next up is public comment, and I know that we have a couple in writing that have been submitted. Jessica, do you have any updates on this before I open it up to folks in attendance today to see if they would like to provide comment?
Nope, I haven't received any additional comment in the committee inbox. The two that were included in the packet, one was a concern about conditions on the I-205 path related to increased camping and debris blocking the path. I included in that email chain in the packet the response to that, just so committee members can kind of see the process that ODOT and our partners, particularly at the City of Portland, are using to address some of those concerns. And the other was sent to us from City Eugene staff related to some of the comments that they had shared with the Oregon Transportation Commission on IIJA funding.
Thank you. And Jessica, since you are a primary staff member, would you like to verbally introduce yourself before I go on to comments from community members who are present today?
Oh, sure. I'm Jessica Horning. I'm she, her, or they, them pronouns are fine. I am ODOT's Pedestrian and Bicycle Program Manager and the Board Administrator for OBPAC. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. So if anyone would like to provide comments, please either raise your virtual hand or put a message in the chat letting us know that you would like to share something with us. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Is anyone else seeing any interest here? With that, we are on track for time and per Mavis's comment, determined to make it to our member roundtable at the end of this agenda. So next up is the Oregon Transportation Commission and legislative updates. And with we have Kaz here today to update us on these items. Welcome, Kaz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kaz Zaidi, Strategic Planning and Communications Manager with the Public Transportation Division. And I'll just be giving a quick update. I do have some slides. Jessica, I've got them open, so if I have permission to share the screen, I should be able to just pull them up. Just give me a moment.
You should be able to share. There we go.
Let's start at the beginning. That's always the best place to start. So we're going to cover a few different bits and pieces, starting off with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we're coming to the end of this part of the process. The OTC has had their final public comment meeting. That was on the 10th. And now they're in the process of making that final decision. So the final decision will be on the 30th on the flexible funds, which is about 400 million. And then May 12th and beyond is going to be the approval, the prioritization of projects of both the flexible funds and the remainder of the, I think, 1.2 billion, which is coming to Oregon through those federal funds. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the major themes of the public comments. There was a lot of support for investing in public and active transportation, in safe routes to school and in great streets, for improving safety across all modes, for investing in bridges and preserving roads. There was a desire expressed to address bottlenecks on state highways, address the needs of urban arterials. So those are major roads, highways that also run through urban areas. An interest in investing in fish and wildlife crossings, in expanding electric vehicle charging opportunities, and concern expressed by a number of people in different ways about there being a fair regional distribution of the funding. And as a reminder, these are the 4 scenarios as of prior to March 10th. And we'll see in the next slides that the OTC is probably looking at some form of hybrid scenario. So just as a reminder, there was Fix It, putting the 107 million, the bulk of the money, into fixing what we already have, public and active transportation, looking at putting it into public and active transportation, enhanced highway, again, looking to build more rather than fix what we already have. And then finally, the balanced, which is a three-way split between those. So in terms of the OTC discussion on the 10th, they did indicate that they weren't 100% happy with any of the scenarios and that they wanted to see some kind of hybrid between Fix It and public and active transportation. So Travis Brower, our AD for finance compliance and something else that I can never remember, is coming up with those. And I think one thing that everyone here will be interested in is that there was very strong interest in both safe routes and great streets. We're working on those revised scenarios. There was also a proposal, again, which is very much in the planning stage for an innovative mobility program. So that tracks roughly onto the transportation's options program that ODOT currently runs, but it would be an expanded version of this. And essentially the proposal by Vice Chair Simpson was to take a chunk of the money, somewhere between 10 and 20 million was what he proposed. I don't know whether that will be the final amount, and put it towards a grant program based around things like van pools and making bike shares interoperable and micromobility. So again, that's very much in the early stages of planning, but the other major aspect of that from Commissioner Simpson's point of view was that he wanted to make sure that we were working with CBOs and others who are from transportation disadvantaged and particularly BIPOC communities to ensure that there's a strong equity lens on the distribution of those funds and that work. And then moving on slightly, but still on the subject of equity, we had a Modal Advisory Committee chairs meeting, which Emma very kindly gave up some of her time to attend, and possibly some others here as well, though I can't see everyone on the screen just at the moment. And essentially our thinking behind this is with this new money coming in, we have an opportunity to start doing things in a different way, in a more inclusive way. And one of the areas that we've identified where we can do better when it comes to bringing our stakeholders and community members into the process is to start with the brainstorming level of decision making, because the subject matter experts can end up making, without even realizing they're doing it, decisions which then narrow the scope of opportunity further down the line when we're more used to going out to consult. So we had this meeting. We invited the chairs of our various modal advisory committees, as well as any guests that they were interested in bringing who were members of transportation disadvantaged groups. We had a couple of people turn up and give some extremely useful and also very moving feedback. And as a result of that, we had a discussion on programming for great streets and safe routes to school. On safe routes, the consensus was to grow the existing programs and then put aside some money for new ideas. And on great streets, we consulted on the program criteria. In case anyone's not familiar, Great Streets is a pot of money that's being put together by ODOT for IIJA funding. And the idea is to take the complete streets concept and bring it up to the next level. We're going to run a couple of pilots over the next couple of years, do a proof of concept. And the critical element here that was brought up by a couple of people is that there are a number of streets that were transferred before the Great Streets program was ever conceived of, were jurisdictionally transferred, and these were not in great condition when they were transferred, so they should also be eligible, was the feedback that we received.
Thank you, Kaz. Before you go on, I'd love to just share a little bit more, given that I was there representing OBPAC with Hal, if you don't mind me just stepping in for a moment on this topic. So a couple other things that were raised in that modal leadership meeting that I think are important is within the Safe Routes to School program, looking at cost-effective state delivery. So some of you may recall when I provided the update on the EASY, aka equitable, basically active transportation projects delivered more quickly in an equitable way. There was an example shared by Ohio doing crossing enhancement projects that were state delivered, and they got a lot more value out of that delivery because it was a state package of projects across the state. So that was mentioned as an idea, and there was interest among the group. With regards to great streets, there was a recommendation to set a minimum project threshold, either by dollar or distance covered, to make sure that it's an effective pilot and really can show what that type of program could do in the future if it was funded more. And then also a recommendation to focus on leveraging across programs and funding to fund complete projects that help overcome the ODOT STIP funding silos. Because it's really difficult to deliver complete projects if there's a little bit of money here and a little bit of money here and a little bit of money here, all with different constraints associated with them. So those are just some of my broader takeaways that I wanted to chime in with. Back to you, Kaz. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for covering the bits that I've missed there, Emma. Just to give you an idea of the ways in which we've been trying to bring people in, this is a slide from the Safe Routes to School presentation, giving people a sense of the kind of options we were putting in front of those that were there. And here we can see that the options were essentially maximize our opportunities, do fewer and do them well, or spread the money more thinly. And the general consensus, as I said earlier, was to go for option A, do a few things well, but then leave some money aside. And in the past, these are decisions that generally would have been made in-house, but we're very much trying to open out that decision-making process to make sure that at the very inception stage of some of this programming, we're bringing people in, and then of course, keeping them engaged and involved and widening that circle of engagement as the project becomes more and more real. And so my final slide here today is just a very brief recap of the legislative short session. There were only really 2 bills that had a direct impact on public transportation, well, specifically public transportation, or areas that members of this committee might find interesting. HB 4077 creates an environmental justice mapping tool and requires agencies that are designated as natural resource agencies, of which ODOT is one, because we have stewardship quite a large amount of land in Oregon, that they must use this forthcoming tool. It hasn't actually been completed yet, but once it is, it must be used in informing our policies and programs. And you may be aware that there's something similar that's being rolled out at a federal level. So the bottom line on that is we don't yet know what this is precisely going to look like, but it will require us to take account of the environmental impacts of, for example, building a highway and where we build the highway through on the basis of the data that will be contained in this mapping tool. And then SB 1558 is a slightly convoluted one, so I'll do my best to give it in a very minimalist form, but essentially it directs money from the vehicle privilege tax towards electric vehicles as a rebate. Before that money then goes into the Connect Oregon program. Now, Connect Oregon is mostly concerned with capital for freight rail projects, but there's also an element of it which goes into the Oregon Community Paths program. And whilst we can't know precisely because it's dependent on how many people take up the rebate, we do know that there's likely to be some sort of drop in funding available for the Community Paths program. Our initial estimations are somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000. But again, this is in some ways still up in the air. There was a proposal when it was pointed out that this was going to be the impact to bring in some lottery bond money. That didn't come together over the course of the session, but this is something that legislators are aware of, and I do believe some of them were uncomfortable with the way that things proceeded. So this may well not be the last that we've heard of this particular bill. and specifically the drop in funding that the community paths program has experienced. Though I think it is worth pointing out that we're getting quite a fair chunk from the IIJA for Oregon community paths. Of course, we don't want to lose any of the money that goes to that important program. So with that, I will attempt to stop my share, which is something that I still haven't yet mastered. No idea how. Could you kill it for me, please, Jessica?
Well, Kaz and Jessica figured that out. Anyone have questions or comments? Thank you, Kaz, for the presentation and updates.
I had a question about the complete streets. Is that like a whole system planning kind of idea, or is it just like going towards bike and pedestrian again?
As I was, or I'm not sure if that was for Kaz or me, Mavis.
I just want an answer.
Kaz, why don't you take it?
Well, I'll give the brief overview, and if I miss anything, Emma, please do jump in. It's for the entire system, but because it's focused primarily on ODOT highways that are also used as main streets, the area that needs most improvements, or the areas that need most improvements there, are crossings, sidewalks, and bike lanes. So those are the there will probably be some money spent on resurfacing the road surface itself, but the majority of the money is intended to go to these sort of what have been seen in the past as secondary or ancillary projects, to make sure that, as well as being a highway that road users can move through at reasonable speed, it's also safe for the people who live there and use it for a commercial purposes.
Thank you.
And Mavis, I may have confused us by saying complete streets when I think Kaz is speaking to the Great Streets funding program that ODOT has now established. I was thinking back to some of the conversations we had at OBPAC with Ken Schonkweiler up in Astoria when we last met up there, and just the challenges of piecing together different funding sources to deliver a project on a segment of street that has the ADA, that has the safety, that has all the different elements, without having these siloed projects that are maybe like a surgical approach to safety, or a surgical approach to here's the ADA, but it really didn't address the accessibility overall for pedestrians in the area. That type of thing.
I was just targeting it because with the transportation plan, we're really looking at like the whole system, and how we keep focusing, okay, so we'll focus over here, and we'll try to get it up to snuff, and yet we're dropping the ball in so many other ways. So they're looking at a complete rehaul of like how we're looking at it and going forward. And I wanted to see if this was it, because if it is, it's great. But if it's once again siloing things, then that is disappointing. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that in our update from you later on the agenda. Anyone else have questions or comments? I have one I'll share. I'm not seeing anyone else raising their hand. I am curious about why such an emphasis on safe routes to school and great streets within the IIJA funding discussion, and not increasing in funds for the Oregon community paths, especially with the legislation that is eroding some of the funding that already existed.
I can answer a bit of that, but if there are any subject matter experts here, they may be able to dive further in. In essence, because that's what we heard from the community feedback. So it's worth saying that the IIJA and the legislative processes were both happening more or less at the same time, i.e. last month, but they're not connected in any direct way. So the legislature just happened to think at the same time that we were doing this engagement process that it would be a good idea to put extra money into electric vehicle rebates, and they took some of that money from community paths. In terms of the feedback we got, so we ran a couple of processes. There was the mainstream process. I also worked with the Office of Social Equity to do an equitable engagement process, where we held a series of focus groups and workshops for people in transportation disadvantaged groups, and primarily people from BIPOC communities. And we were hearing pretty much the same things, with some slight differences in emphasis. Safe Routes to School was universally thought of as a brilliant program, and Great Streets was generally the second priority. It kind of switched from group to group as to which one was the highest priority, but those two were far out ahead. And then often the third priority was safety, which obviously both Great Streets and Safe Routes have built into them. So that was the feedback we heard both through the mainstream process and within the equitable engagement process. Although again, I think it is worth saying that that there is a substantial uplift in funding coming to community paths. Unfortunately, Susan's not here. She'd be able to speak to that in considerably more detail than I can. But in essence, the answer to your question is that that's what people were most interested in.
Thank you, Kaz. And I appreciate that as, ODOT is being responsive to what you're hearing. As a committee, I think it's important to think about how we might share more information about the underfunded nature of Oregon community paths, because I know that a lot of people know about Safe Routes to School across the state. So I'm not surprised that a lot of people are saying, hey, upfund that. We'd like to see more in that realm. And with the transition and how off-street paths are funded not too long ago, I think the Oregon Community Paths program just is more in its infancy and could benefit from some more messaging to both ODOT leadership and the Oregon Transportation Commission around the lack of funding for it to really make a significant statewide impact. We have the letter from the city of Eugene in our public comments today that speaks to this point of the off-street paths being underfunded. And then what I'll share out the e-micromobility, there was also comments related to need for more path funding in that context as well. But I really appreciate that answer. And then I'm seeing a question in the chat here from Jessica. Kaz, are there any remaining opportunities for OBPAC to provide input on the decision-making process between now and their May meeting, which I so appreciate, because that was my next question. What are the next steps for engagement? I think Jessica had emailed me saying that there's a due date the end of this week if OBPAC wanted to provide further input. So can you just elaborate on how we might comment further if we wish to do so?
Yeah, so essentially a letter is probably the only way at this stage. I think that it is worth pointing out as well that the OTC has been deluged with comments. So I would say that if you're able to get a letter together in the next few days, outlining some of your priorities, and perhaps in the light of the shift in the discussion that happened on the 10th, that you would probably be able to get that in under the wire. Whether or not folks would be able to look at it, I think at this stage is another question. But I certainly think that that it will be worth making the attempt. And then the final deliberation happens on the 30th. After that, it's really up to the OTC what they decide the next process to be, the next steps in the process to be. Generally, we are working to, and I say we as both ODOT and specifically PTD, we're working on ways in which we can make the prioritization process for projects and the selection process going forward more open, more transparent, and more equitable. But all of those things are kind of very much dependent on that decision on the 30th, because of course we can't go out to consult or start making plans till we know precisely what it is that we're planning around.
Thank you. I see an additional comment from Marcia in the chat saying we could see an increase of nearly 21 million for Oregon Community Paths from IIJA. Thank you. Is that over the 2022 to 2027 time horizon, or what? How many years does that 21 million span across?
Oh, I have that. You're gonna ask me. I think it is over several years, Emma. It's not all in 1 year. I think we are assuming 11 million in our first cycle, so it'd be 9 million coming later.
Great.
Now,
Thank you.
years.
It's split between the upcoming cycle this year and the 2024 cycle.
Thank you so much for that additional info. So given what Kaz has shared, there's a pretty quick turnaround if we want to provide further comments. I know Jessica had asked how as our leader in a lot of letter drafting and providing comments to OTC on legislative and kind of funding matters. I don't know that we've heard back from her. Jessica, did you hear anything from Hal? Okay, no response, and I know that she's not here today because she's quite busy this week. So given that, is anyone interested in doing an updated letter and submitting written comment by the end of this week to the Oregon Transportation Commission? Or we can say we've commented and that's that. I think it is interesting that they're not going with any of the scenarios that were presented, but more of a hybrid approach between fix-it and public and active transportation. Our committee has voiced our support for public and active transportation in our previous comments. And so we could reiterate those if we wish to do so, or we can say we'll take a pass on this one. Not seeing anyone jumping out of their seats ready to draft another letter. So with that, I think we have completed this agenda item, and thank you so much, Kaz, for all of your updates and answers to various questions. Next up, we have the committee business. And so the first item is to review and approve the minutes from our last meeting. I would entertain a motion to move and approve the minutes from last meeting. See Bill moving that motion, and do I have a second? Mavis is seconding. So all in favor of approving our minutes from the last meeting, please say aye and or raise your thumb or hand.
Aye.
And we've got consensus, full approval of the minutes. Thank you. Now, before we get into the work plan updates, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of do a committee check-in. There's been a lot happening in the world the last couple of years. I was thinking over lunch, knowing that this meeting was happening. It's like I've worked with Aaron for a couple of years now, and I still have yet to meet him in person. Maybe that changes on the horizon, but I'd like to just do a general check-in about kind of what you hope to get out of the work on OBPAC, what you hope to contribute. To start informing how we might go towards finalizing our work plan and continuing to do the work that we do. So I just want to take a moment for all of us to reflect and think back to when you applied to OBPAC and think about maybe one or two things where you're like, I really would love to be on OBPAC because. And then we'll do a round robin and share in a moment here. And when you're ready, you can just look back up at the screen. Take your time if you need another moment. Okay. Mavis, are you still working on it? Do you need another moment? You're good? Okay. Robert, are you good? Ready? Okay. I think we are all ready. So who would like to start us off? I'd like to hear from everyone by the end of this little brief check-in. Bill.
Well, as I said in the introduction, the reason I applied to be on OBPAC was to be a voice for seniors and the needs that seniors have in the bike and ped community. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Appreciate the courage of going first. Who would like to follow Bill? Lauren?
I work in a very rural area and I work in mobility, which includes trying to help people get to their jobs and to healthcare and that sort of thing. And it's really, really a challenge. So I was excited to see that Oregon even had a bicycle and pedestrian committee that we could hopefully encourage more people or make it even easier for them to navigate by ways other than jumping in a car or, you know, even a bus or whatever, that they feel comfortable doing that. And so I felt like this would be a great place to start for me. I know you guys have been doing great work all along, but to be at this level, I mean, first of all, it feels like such an honor to be able to work at this level on that and see what's coming from the top down. So it makes me feel encouraged and wanting to participate more in the community as far as the bike ped. I'm hoping really to add that to our mobility program. Right now, like I said, it's just vehicles, but I'm hoping that we can add a bicycle component to that. And to also see all of the places that we can connect, even if it's by that, you know, people throwing their bikes on the bus fronts and whatever to help us connect to all transportation throughout Oregon.
Thank you. I love the fresh energy you bring and the vision that you're painting for us. Who would like to share next? Mavis.
I'll go. All right, so I'm officially starting my second term at the OBPAC, so I've officially been here a while, which is exciting. So there are a lot of reasons I like being on this committee. One is I sell bikes for a living, so I talk about bikes all day long, and things like the excise tax really affects me, and where I have to like explain to people, no, that $15 there, that doesn't actually go to me, that goes to some other place and it's doing this other thing. And so having a say in excise taxes and things like that and kind of knowing what's going on, that's important to me for my business. And then I live in the middle of a town in Eastern Oregon, but I walk everywhere, or I bike for the most part. And so every day I run into people that are awesome or not so awesome. And so just the idea that we can go out and we can make a system that is more inclusive and better, safer for everyone is pretty premium. And then like Lauren is saying, we've got a long ways to go. And so like in Eastern Oregon, for example, we were trying to put in this beautiful bicycle path. It would have been wonderful, but we got shouted out by some very uninformed individuals, and the result was we didn't get a path. And so you can't always have from the bottom up. And if you can, sometimes it's fun to go to the top. So here I am.
Glad you're here. Thank you so much. Erin?
Yeah, I can go next. Initially, I was just really interested in becoming an OBPAC member just because I've always been really passionate of creating a more equitable state of Oregon. And then, of course, walking and biking is a super important part of that, just because I know that access to, safe walking paths or biking paths is not the same across the state of Oregon. So I was really passionate about that. And I also love that OBPAC was super willing to bring on like a young voice. I was really surprised when I heard that it was like an under 21 specific position. So I also try to bring that perspective to the table as well, because I know it's not very common to have such young people on a committee like OBPAC. So I try to just bring that voice a little bit more, and also like underrepresented communities as well. Coming from a small town as well, I think I try to like kind of just put that into every little piece of feedback that I give back, and hopefully try to bring kind of those voices to the table.
Thank you. Robert, you knew you were next.
Yeah, it's really inspiring hearing everyone talk about what inspires them and what motivates them. So Emma, thanks for suggesting this agenda topic. This was a really good idea. So I think I'm motivated by a lot of the same things that I've been hearing from others. I think about mobility justice and transportation equity and you know, just basically how we have this highway industrial complex that we're all victims of, that leads to traffic violence and leads to climate change. And I would just love to be able to affect some change and disrupt this kind of vicious cycle that we're caught in of you know, ever widening roads and patterns of development that basically force us all to use cars and restrict our freedom of mobility, and that most impacts the most vulnerable people in our society. You know, all the disparities from traffic violence and climate change and these other impacts are felt most heavily by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So that motivates me. And then more specifically, when I just think about what a complete system for biking and walking looks like across the state, it really depends on the off-street system, not just the on-street system. And ODOT is the most important entity in providing that off-street system. They own and manage the biggest chunk of it, and they have the means, unlike any other agency, to complete it. But I've just experienced through my 15 years in this profession that they often kind of overlook that role. But the Oregon Community Paths program, I think, has been just a really great opportunity. And I'm really appreciative to ODOT for doing such a good job of administering this new program. So that's really been it's kind of reinvigorated my interest in the OBPAC work, to be able to be involved in Oregon Community Paths, and for ODOT to be helping all of these local agencies meet their needs to build out their connected on-street and off-street transportation system through this grant program. So thank you, ODOT, for stepping up and recognizing that unmet need and creating that program.
Thank you so much for sharing. I too am inspired, and I'm really glad that we're taking some time to have this conversation, just kind of connect as to why are we here? Why do we show up month after month and put in our time? And what's the vision we're each working toward, which I'm already hearing commonalities. A couple of things that came to mind for me were the goal of increasing funding for walking and biking infrastructure, and really investing in a way that reduces fatal and life-altering injuries while reducing inequities. And so I'm hearing that echoed by other folks as well. Another vision that I've had for, gosh, probably a decade, well before I was actually on OBPAC, was to build community across the state, connecting people across the state to be more effective at influencing walking and biking across our entire state. We've already made some progress with that, with regards to reaching out to the bike ped reps on the area commissions on transportation. And there's this next round of outreach, engaging the local bike ped active transportation committees, and really connecting folks who have a shared vision and can be so much more effective connecting and having shared power in trying to bring about these changes and shift from status quo to a vision that really works well for everyone and is grounded in health and well-being. So, thank you all taking the time. That was just kind of, great to have a moment to share in that way. We don't have a ton of our time on our agenda to actually update the work plan in this meeting, but I think this is a great primer that I'm hoping will give us time to think between now and our next meeting about where we might want to head and really focus our time and energy in the months and years to come to be most effective in bringing our visions into being. Any thoughts, comments in relation to that before we kind of pivot back to more of the business work plan update items? Okay.
I can hardly wait till we can have these conversations after the meeting, because it's going to be great.
Yes. So with that, I was actually hoping for, like, this is July travel meeting logistics. Jessica, can we just jump ahead for a moment and talk our next meeting and when we might be able to join up in person at some point?
Yeah, definitely. We can change it up. So right now we have a travel meeting in person penciled in for July. That was because May was a pretty busy month for some folks to try to do an overnight travel meeting. And I will say Marcia is on the line and can tell me if I'm wrong here, because I haven't cleared this with her yet. But we do have our next meeting in May. And we could talk about trying to do that as an in-person meeting, either in Salem or in Portland, not as a full-fledged travel meeting, if there's interest in that.
Yeah, ODOT buildings will open to the public May 1st. Well, state buildings will open to the public May 1st. We will be starting to trickle in to some in-office work earlier, around the 1st of April, but the governor's direction is that the state buildings do not open to the public until May 1st, Jessica. So May would be the first time we could use our facilities to host an in-person meeting with external participants.
So with our next meeting being May 24th, that's something we could talk about if there's interest. And then for the July meeting logistics, we had talked last time about there being a desire to have that travel meeting be in Southwest Oregon in the Phoenix talent area to see how the wildfire recovery is going and learn more about Highway 99 and efforts to build that back better with Jenna Marmon, who's our active transportation liaison down in Region 3. Usually how we structure those is a half day of regular, we get a conference room and have a regular business meeting in the afternoon of one day, spend the night. ODOT books all the hotel rooms and everything for members, and then spend the next morning doing a site visit. This would probably be Highway 99 and the Bear Creek Greenway, which has been funded by grants that this committee has helped to make select for funding in the past. And then talking about, some of the funding that for Highway 99 and building that back better that this committee, or at least Aaron has authored a thank you letter to OTC for some of that funding. So it would be morning walking, biking tour with local partners, and then have lunch. Everybody has time to travel home before it gets dark out. So with our July meeting being, if we were to hold that on the regular date, it would be July 26th. So what I was thinking, if folks have the ability to pull out a calendar right now and look at it, if having that business meeting on the afternoon of Monday, the 25th, with a morning site visit on the 26th, if that seems like it would work on folks' calendars, or would it make more sense to do the afternoon meeting on the 26th, like we normally have it scheduled, and do a site visit meeting the 27th, which would be a Wednesday.
And seeing 26th, 27th from Mavis. For me personally, 25th, 26th would be better, but I could probably make the 27th work if need be. Others, if you want to drop your preference for those 25th, 26th, or 26th, 27th of July in the chat, we can get a quick little inventory.
All right, it's looking like 25th. Mavis, if we did the 25th, 26th, could you make that the 25th work, or would you only be able to join for the 26th?
I will be spreading my grandmother's ashes and coming back out on the 25th. So I can make the 26th, but I can't make the 27th. And it's up in Mazama, Washington. So it's a long ways from Ashland.
26th, 27th would work best for me.
I can make that work. I'm looking to Erin and Lauren. Could you make the 26th, 27th work? Yes, from Erin. Robert, what are you seeing for your calendar that week?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the chat, I'm flexible. I can do either. I'm just glad that we're going to get it squared away today so that it doesn't fill up.
And Lauren, if you just want to hop off mute for a second, let us know if the 27th. Okay, thumbs up. 26th, 27th, it is. Wonderful. We have an in-person meeting to look forward to.
All right, and I get to remember how travel arrangements and reimbursements at the state of Oregon work after 2 years.
Because you wanted something new to relearn, right?
Yep, gotta refresh those skills. Always learning.
Thanks, Jessica. And then so for the May meeting, so we could maybe do, is that worth looking at any in person, or should we just do the virtual meeting for that? May 24th.
Works for me, but I'm not the only one.
I'm fine either way. I can do in person if that's everyone's preference.
I can go see my grandma.
Bill, Lauren, Erin, any interest in looking at in person? Would it be maybe up in Portland at the ODOT office if we did?
Probably in Portland, because then I think that's easier to get Mavis to. So I think it's kind of Lauren, if we were able to pay mileage for you, would that for you?
It's more the length of the drive than mileage. So if I could have the option of calling in, I'd rather do that for Portland.
Okay. We can try to figure out how to make the hybrid meeting work.
I could do it if you guys really wanted me to be there in person, but it's just a long drive.
I get it, especially if it's a shorter meeting. I think if I were to, if we were going to do it in person, I'd want to maybe extend that meeting, but then our next meeting in July is already a longer meeting. So 2 longer meetings in a row is maybe not ideal.
Yeah.
Anyone strongly want to get together with some in-person / hybrid in May, or should we keep May virtual just for a little bit more transition time and then do the in-person 2-day in July.
Either way, whatever is easiest. Sounds like maybe virtual is easier. Because you made a good point, Emma, it really is just a shorter meeting.
Yeah, from a staffing perspective, if we focus on the travel meeting in July, and then maybe we'll have more of the kinks worked out of our hybrid meeting technology and setup.
That sounds great. Let's support Jessica because she's already relearning a new skill from the past for July. So we'll have a virtual meeting from 1 to 4 on May 24th as our next meeting. And then we will meet July 26th, 27th down in Phoenix, kind of Ashland area. And I'm just adding this to make sure I don't book over with something else. Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we have a few things to cover before our break. I put in the chat, someone went into our agenda and took out this section of the agenda. So it'd be really helpful if you made a copy and accidentally cut and paste this section of the agenda. If you could put that back in, it would help me facilitate our meeting, please.
I don't think I did it. I clicked the undo button a bunch of times and nothing happened. But what's the section that's missing?
Jessica's coming to the rescue. It is the work plan update section. So we'll have brief updates on these items with the goal of going on break 10 minutes from now. So Erin and Lauren, would one of you like to provide an update, please, on the outreach to the area commissions on transportation, local bike ped, active transportation committees, et cetera?
I guess I will do that. Aaron and I talked on the phone, and he was an enormous help in getting me started on making these outreach calls. And then the ODOT or the staff filled in as much as they could on who the representatives were. And I got all that. So all that being said, I was able to reach a little over half of the representatives. There's 2 that I have scheduled for after this meeting, the end of next week and then early April. But I was seeing kind of an overall theme going through all of the people. I did just go ahead and take the questions that we had from last year, even though I think we said that it wasn't going to be as in depth. I wasn't sure what that meant. so I went through that. So all of the participants that I talked to were at last year's event. They all really liked it. They've been on ACT between about 1.5 years and 8 years. There was one, I guess I don't know if there's a rule. I think there's kind of a rule that they're supposed to have a bike ped representative. So like one of them is an ODOT appointee. He's actually an employee that's there. And it was, well, I guess the bylaws don't really call for them, but they want them to be on there. And that's one of the things that they had asked that maybe we could help change, is to make sure that the ACTs do have a representative for bike ped. It kind of gets lost, I've noticed, in some of their meetings. It's like it's there, but they're not as taken maybe as important as other areas. Let's see. Are we sharing the agenda here?
Yeah, I can stop sharing my screen though if you want.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. It's just easier for me to talk to you all if I can see you.
Yeah.
So they are also, all of the people were voting members. That was one of the questions that they were asked. They meet between once a month to quarterly. It depends. I think some of the ACT committees meet maybe more often than their representatives are included in that. And currently it was interesting listening to Kaz and Emma and the things they were talking about, because that was a lot of their concern, the things that you were talking about with the IJA funding, where that's going to be going. So what they're finding generally is that when they talk about where the funding should be allocated, it's mostly, most members are asking for it to go to the highways and vehicle and things like that. And so it's nice that the representatives are there to kind of be watchdogs basically for the group to make sure that these things are being brought up. And so they want to continue to do that. One of the members even said they're like, they have kind of a boilerplate agenda. And I think this is even in the Portland area, that they kind of go over and talk about the same things over and over again. And when there's funding opportunities, they want to make the highways bigger and better. And so they kind of don't look too much at the bike ped area of it. They also wanted, well, the rural areas were kind of unclear about the difference between enhancement and fix it. And so they would kind of like a little bit more information. There are some people that wanted more information on the IIJA, and there's others who are on that committee and many other committees that have heard it more times than they care to talk about. But I think it would still be helpful to give them more information about that. So what else was on that?
You remind me, Lauren, I was in the first work group meeting. It sounds like you've connected with Aaron. What are our next steps on this item? Are we clear on that, or might we set an action going from this meeting forward?
Our next steps, well, I assume it would be to choose a date and put together an agenda and the program itself. Those weren't something that I was specifically tasked with, so I haven't done that, but I did get the dates that people were not available in April. So is that just what you were looking for, just to kind of see what
Yeah,
our
that
next
sounds
steps were?
great. I think
Oh,
it'd be
okay.
good if we can reconvene as a work group, maybe in the next little while here.
Oh, okay.
Next week or two, reconvene as a work group, set the date, and actually have that next gathering. I know Kaz had shared that he needed to get to the end of March before he had any capacity. So thank you for that update. Jessica, I see that your hand is up related to this item.
Yeah, based on our chat, Lauren, I started up drafting up a doodle poll that we could send out to folks to try to nail down that date. The question I had for you and the committee is, do you want to include some dates that are before the Active Transportation Summit, which is the week of the 25th, or hold off and look more at I think April 28th and May 2nd to 4th were kind of what we're looking open on Kaz and I's calendars.
Okay. Well, I'd only asked people about April because we had talked about mid-April, but if there's something else that's coming up, there's a few people that were definite no's at the end of April because there is another conference or something going on that time. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, there's the Active Transportation Summit was the one that folks had mentioned. So I can go and include some dates before that, like the 18th, 19th of April.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then also, I wouldn't think that we would want to inundate these committee members. So strategically, kind of what would be our best option for getting people to attend this event if they're also attending the other one? Does that make sense? It's like, we want people to come, and they do seem genuinely interested in collaborating with us. Sometimes it sounded like they felt like they were kind of the odd man out on their committees and would love our input.
Another option is there is not an agenda out for the Active Transportation Summit yet. We could reach out to the Street Trust and see if we could incorporate that into the agenda somehow. Like,
yeah, that's a
the sessions are
possibility.
done at this time, and then we have a meeting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that if they do go, if we do it afterward, is that we could be kind of the follow-up to it, you know, and get more in depth into whatever's being discussed. Because they don't want to be necessarily lost in the shuffle, and they feel like they kind of get that treatment in some of their committees and work that they do. They just kind of get lumped in. So putting them into that they might still get that feeling, but if they have an opportunity to talk more about it afterward, we can pull them out of that.
So I'm hearing we can send out a doodle with kind of a mix.
I think that would be a great idea.
Was there a particular time of day?
No,
A quick question.
no, I only had one person that said not on Thursday,
Okay.
whatever it is, but no.
Maybe from late afternoon into early evening, so there's some options there.
Yeah, so I'll just wrap up that pulling up. Sorry, I will finish up pulling together that doodle poll with a range of dates then and send it to you, Lauren, so you can still be the primary contact with folks.
Okay. And then and I can reach out to you guys too, if there's any way we can maybe even get a little bit more information on some of these not vacant positions, but there's still some not completely accurate information. And like I said, there's a couple more people I'll talk to, but mostly they like to talk. We're having a good time.
Well, thank you so much for doing that and keeping this moving along. We will keep going. Would it be helpful to have a work group meeting with you, Erin, and me sometime in the next few weeks so that we can set the agenda and kind of provide a little bit of structure for whatever date is chosen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that. I can send you both a couple options in the chat and hopefully we can figure this out maybe over our break, but I want to keep moving along with the agenda here. Schedule work group. Perfect. And Jessica, can you pop that agenda back up on the screen, please? Thank you. Next up, we have the update from you and Mavis on the Oregon Transportation Plan. And you can go ahead and put that down. I made a copy. Thank you.
Okay, my working group is
first.
not met yet for the OTP. I believe our next meeting is next week, so I will hand it over to Mavis.
All right. So officially my group gets together and then we talk about things and then we send things to Jessica's group and we say, hey, found out all this information for us. So we talked about what we want to find out this last time. And everybody's really focused on a whole system planning, you know, because we're trying to come up with a vision of Oregon and where we want to go and where we want to be in 20 years and what we want the transportation infrastructure to look like. And currently, you know, it's very car centric and we're trying to get away from that. And so when we start looking at this whole system planning, it's that last mile, you know, before you hit the bus stop, it's all those. And so so far we've had a meeting that was getting to know you, and now we're kind of narrowing in. And I mean, nobody's electronically decked anybody yet, so I think we're doing good. Any questions? Okay.
I'm
And
glad
yes,
you're there. Thank you for being part of the process and giving even more of your time to having a voice in that venue.
Well, honestly, I think I'm one of the more like moderates. It's a little weird for me to be one of the moderates, but hey, I'll take it.
Well, thanks for that update. Robert, thank you so much for covering for me and going to the EZ, which that acronym was put in our chat earlier. Work group, the second of the two meetings. Would you like to provide an update, please? Equitable Active Safety Improvements Evaluation. And you're muted.
I just realized I was talking, but I was muted. Okay. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Emma. So I was not familiar with this work and honestly not very familiar with this topic either. So I wasn't really sure what to expect with this meeting, but I actually found it to be surprisingly enjoyable and pretty interesting. So if you're like me and you don't really, when you hear that acronym, you don't know what to make of it or aren't familiar with this work, basically the purpose of the work is that, I might be struggling here to accurately convey this, but Jessica or Emma, I'm sure can help out. But basically it has to do with data on reporting the severity and the frequency of crashes on the state highway system, specifically pedestrian bicycle crashes. And then one of the reasons why this is so important is because it's really key to prioritizing social equity and because of the disproportionately high numbers of pedestrian fatalities within BIPOC parts of the state, like BIPOC communities. So what ODOT has done is they've put together a work group of representatives from other DOTs around the country. So there were folks there, in addition to several ODOT staff there, who included Jessica and then the project manager, who's Ken Schonkweiler from planning. There was also the transportation data manager. There's the traffic safety engineer. And then there's I think there might've been other folks there. They didn't seem to have as much to share though, which I found interesting, but a lot of the folks from the other DOTs had a lot of really interesting information to share. So there were folks from Washington State, Ohio, Florida, Maine. I think those were the main ones, maybe some other DOTs. And ODOT basically has some good examples to follow from other DOTs for how this data can be reported much more quickly. Like we're talking like years. There are some DOTs that are practically instantaneously reporting almost in real time. And that has to do with, and not quite, but like compared to the literal years that it's taking ODOT, it's pretty impressive. So that it turns out that has to do with ODOT's reliance on paper reporting, paper forms, whereas other states have electronic forms and they're receiving data that's already mapped. And then also self-reported data can be unreliable. And it can even be, particularly it can be conflicting if the different parties involved are reporting it differently. So some states do not use self-reported data. And then there's just a lot of other kind of intelligent transportation systems approaches that can be used to supplement crash data, like cameras and smart signals, things like that. So it was just good to see that ODOT is taking this seriously and learning from its peers. I think that the folks working on this project are building a really strong case for making some changes. Hopefully it results in some actual change and hopefully ODOT can implement some of these recommendations. In terms of next steps, I'm actually not sure where it goes from here. But Jessica might have something to add. She might know where it goes from here and might want to point out anything I missed or mischaracterized.
No, I think you hit on all the take homes I had from that meeting. There were a lot of ODOT folks who were pretty quiet in the room for that meeting because the goal was for it to be a peer exchange where we're hearing from other folks rather than talking about our own systems or defending them. So that's why there wasn't quite as much talking from the ODOT folks. But essentially the overall goal of the EASY project is that $10 million in emergency pedestrian safety funding that the Oregon Transportation Commission approved last April was really effective, like getting projects on the ground, some of our highest crash pedestrian corridors in the state. And there's a desire to make that a more sustainable, permanent type of program for ODOT. And so this EASY project is bringing in a consultant to help us figure out how do we overcome some of the key obstacles to making that a sustainable model, which is number one, we don't have the data on where our crashes are quick enough. So this peer exchange, the last peer exchange that Emma attended was on the just how do we get the projects designed and out on the ground faster than we can with our systems right now. And so next steps are for the consultant to do some more work on what are the key takeaways and recommendations for ODOT. So they'll be writing a report with some recommendations on both of those areas. And how do we incorporate more social equity data into the process as well? That is due to our executive steering team, I believe in May. So hopefully we should have more to report back at next meeting on what the recommendations were. And then I think whatever those are, it does link in really closely with the existing work plan and just the things that you all brought up earlier on what you're passionate about and what you're hoping to get at as members of this committee in terms of safety and equitable transportation systems and options. So probably some things that OBPAC can incorporate more specifically into the work plan and help champion as the agency needs to look at some different changes to various systems. So
Thank you.
thanks, Emma and Robert, for attending those exchanges.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for covering, Jessica for filling in on the next steps. And I look forward to hearing or seeing that report with the recommendations for the May meeting. Doing a time check, we are 10 minutes over when we're going to take our break. And I think it's important, especially in bike ped realm, to move our bodies, stand up and move around. So let's go ahead and take a break and come back at 2:28. And we'll do a couple last minutes on the micromobility update. And then Jessica has a couple items on recruitment and the forms that need to be filled out. So we'll wrap this up when we get back and then move on to the highway design manual after that.
And I can just put my items in the chat.
Oh, great. Even better. Thank you. See you all at 2:28. Next up, Bill and Lauren, we have some, thank you for remembering to re-record. We have some insurance forms to get to you, and I'm excited that the land use and local government representative is going out for recruitment later today. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate, based on last meeting's comments around the complexity of the process, how it's been revised to have the two-stage application with a simpler, more streamlined initial request of people, so there's not such a barrier to participating on our committee. That's really important. I have sent a couple messages to Lauren and Aaron trying to get our work group meeting scheduled. And with that, I will give a brief update on the electronic micromobility meeting that I went to, and then we will transition over to the highway design manual. So yesterday, it was only yesterday, I went to a listening session that is coming out of the climate office at ODOT. And so the climate office did an assessment around electrification across the state. This specific listening session was focused on electric micromobility. There were a number of different people there, from advocacy organizations, government agencies. There was one individual there from University of Washington, and they had done some great evaluation work related to electronic micromobility, e-bikes, et cetera. And so drawing from that example, as well as someone based in Corvallis, was really wonderful to hear just what's going on and how these small scale rollout of programs could be scaled up at the state level. The topics that they were listening to participants on were financial incentives. So paying people like an instant rebate to put towards a purchase of an e-bike or other form of electric vehicle, micro mobility, so not electric cars, anything smaller than that. We talked a lot about safety, and some individuals said, this is really important, and that if we don't address safety and the use of our infrastructure, our transportation system, then we're only ever going to see, the more confident and fearless folks going out and riding the system. And then there's also some conflicts between people who are using electric assist devices and people who are already walking and biking on our multi-use paths. And so with kind of a theme of different comments and discussion around that, it made me think about our Oregon Community Paths program and how there's enough funding to do, a few segments of path across the state, but really the vision, I think, in the future would be to provide these duplicate systems that provide for both pedestrian speed walking and rolling on paths, as well as a higher speed path system. And so given that that is needed, especially in locations where there's high volume of walking and biking and other electric micromobility use, that's just something I want our committee to think about in relation to Oregon Community Paths, and how do we build out the off-street system that will really serve the future needs for transportation in our state. There was a lot of conversation about charging and how users currently charge their e-bikes or e-scooters, lack of publicly available charging, and is this a barrier or not? One individual up in Portland was sharing about how he has 2 chargers and is now using an adapter to charge from electric vehicle charging stations for his e-bike, tracking over 40 miles in a day. So there really is a wide range of uses, from several miles to tens of miles on the daily, and having multiple batteries. There was conversation about education, parking, and whether that's a barrier to usage and where it's needed most. Some conversations about people living in apartments without good bike parking, not feeling comfortable leaving their bikes outside, and therefore they're not participating in the rebate program because they're too concerned about theft being an issue and not having a place to securely store the bike, even if they could purchase it. Equity was also brought up, some issues around age limitations, and then talk about driver education and integrating more information about this into driver's tests and potentially Oregon Friendly Driver. And so that is my brief summary. I'm glad that the Climate Office is listening, bringing together experts and trying to figure out what the true barriers are and to help overcome them and really lead with equity and climate at the same time. So that, I think we've covered everything for our committee business. Are you seeing that too? Okay, we're good. Thanks, Jessica. We will move on to the highway design manual update. And so are Will and Roger here? Wonderful. Good afternoon to you, and thank you for coming back to give us another update on the highway design manual.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me back. Roger,
Hi.
Roger's joining us too. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Roger.
I'm Roger Gutierrez, and I had the privilege of getting to update the part 900 of the highway design manual. Just something that you may or may not be aware of, the 2012 highway design manual. We had a single chapter that was bicycle and pedestrian together. And with this update, among other things in the highway design manual, it's a pretty substantial update for pedestrian and bicycle, because there's a separate chapter for pedestrian and a separate chapter for bicycle. And this one has about 190 pages of new stuff. So my screen is frozen. I wonder if you can hear me all right.
We're hearing you fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Um,
Roger is our office's expert on this too. So hopefully, I know that I was not able to answer some of the questions at the last meeting, and Roger should be able to help me with some of these this time around.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think will be of interest to you is one section in the Highway Design Manual about the bike bill. Now, previously, we had a paragraph that kind of mentioned the bike bill, and I wanted to just say that in the past, the bike bill's been around. That's the Oregon statute 366-514. It's been around, for 50 years, and what ODOT in the past has done has the way that we did projects was there was modernization projects, and on a modernization project, it triggers the bike bill. It triggers accommodations for bicycling and walking. And preservation type projects don't arrive at that trigger point. And the way that we do projects now is sometimes piecemeal. We have different funding streams that we put them together. And so one of the aims in putting this section together was to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks, that we don't have modernization type projects, but we can still have a project that should essentially trigger the bike bill and have those requirements. So the aim of this section is to, so the terms construction and reconstruction and relocation are defined so that we know when that is included in a project that the scope is required to have certain things. And the other thing is, if there's an exemption to the bike bill, how do we document that exemption? Based off of the interpretation of the statute, it says that there needs to be opportunity for interested parties to provide input. As it is right now, when there is a design exception to an ODOT standard, and it has to do with historic preservation, one of the things that we do to document that is we get a letter from the State Highway Preservation Office that says this was historically significant, and that's just justification for how, if there's an exception in that location. And so the idea came, well, if opportunities for interested parties to provide input is something that we should have anyway for a bike bill exemption, then a new addition in the Highway Design Manual is to say that if an exemption is to take place, then some kind of documentation, like a letter from an organization that represents the needs of people who walk and bike should be included as documentation. That indicates that there was opportunity for review and input. And so OBPAC, I actually put you down as a possible option for the public review, for the letter in that. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and then anything else that maybe you wanted, questions that you had.
Thank you. Is there any more that you wanted to share, or are you turning it over for discussion on that?
I think turning it over.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a little delay in Roger's internet, but we heard you and it worked. So thank you very much for that update. I really appreciate incorporating an opportunity for OBPAC to review. I know I didn't have time over the weekend to do it, but Hal did dive into this, and her comments are in our folder for today's meeting. I also want to say thank you very much to Lake McTie's work with Metro. She has provided detailed comments as well. So I'm really glad that we have some experts who are attuned to the walking and biking needs reviewing this chapter, because this is a significant update that's really, really important to achieving goals that OBPAC is working toward and advising ODOT on. So with regards to the question around would OBPAC like to be kind of an interested party to do review and provide letters, I would love to hear a little bit more from you, Roger, about what that would entail. How often, how many projects, what are we talking as far as potential workload?
Yeah, that's a great question. It could be none. It could be some from time to time. I think that one thing that's really unique about OBPAC is you're a statewide organization. So something, if there isn't a local city advocacy organization of some kind, say it's a corridor that's on the Oregon coast in between towns or something like that, but it's part of the statewide route, you know, that might be something that would be of interest or something. I don't know. In the years I've reviewed design exceptions, there have been a handful of these types of exceptions over the years. But with the language input in here, that might increase. Maybe more projects will understand the trigger points, and maybe it wouldn't. So that it's hard to say. I think that it's been, you know, 1 or 2 a year is what I've seen in the past probably, but I could be vastly off. I sometimes am. And then what kind of workload would it be? I would imagine opportunity for an agenda item on one of the meetings to talk about something for 15 minutes or something, provide some input. It'd be up to you guys, I guess, as far as how much you would want to be involved with something.
Thank you. Jessica was nodding her head in agreement with what you're sharing. Jessica, do you have anything else to add?
I'd agree with Roger that it's probably 1 or 2 a year that pop up where we have a discussion about like, what does it apply, and where there is, you know, a discussion about should there be an exemption for a particular project. So it's definitely not going to be something that would overwhelm the agendas for the committee. I think maybe a good example of how this process that Roger and Will and the team have kind of laid out in the HDM would play out a little bit differently. An item that's been on OBPAC's agenda in the past is the I-205 Abernathy Bridge project, where there was a question from the committee about how Bike Bill worked with that particular project, and the project team brought their letter justifying why they thought they had an exemption, and there was discussion from there. With this new process, that would be flipped on its head. The project team identifies there's a Bike Bill issue here. They would have to come to, with that project, they likely would go to the Clackamas County Bike Ped Advisory Committee first, since there is a very active local committee there, but they could also come to OBPAC to discuss that, and they would have to do that before they write any documentation about how they're proceeding with any sort of exemptions that they're still trying to claim. So I think that it's going to be really helpful for the process. And it would be probably projects like if there's something that comes up along the coast where it's a very important statewide route for walking and biking, or along one of the scenic bikeways where you've got a similar important statewide network role, but generally smaller communities that don't have active ped bike advisory committees that would be coming to this group.
Would it also include ones that do? Maybe all of them?
Wouldn't have to. It could.
Well, in looking at our work plan, I do see that this is tracking well with a couple of our items under ODOT policy adoption and implementation. So my instinct, I'm looking at the group for feedback, is to say yes to this with the understanding that as it rolls out over time, we could, have some discussions and make adjustments if it is too much work, or if we're seeing all of them and we want to focus on the ones where the local committees aren't engaging. We could kind of have this evolve through doing, but I'm more inclined to be involved, have the opportunity to review, ensure the comprehensive implementation of the bike bill's intent, and supporting the implementation of the blueprint for urban design work that we've already invested effort into. So let's see, anyone disagree with that? I'm seeing some supportive head nods. Okay, seeing interest there. So let's move forward with this as proposed and know that we can converse and make adjustments as needed. Any other questions or comments for Roger and Will before we wrap this up and keep moving? Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to come and present and for all of your great work on this.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Thank you.
We are gaining a little bit of time. I'm hoping with this next agenda item, we can make up our lost time, or maybe even wrap up early on it. So we get a break a little bit early. The 24-27 STIP update. And so Jessica is bringing this item back to us, recognizing that context has changed. Over to you, Jessica.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna run through a couple of these first slides real quickly because some of this is repeat information, but wanted to provide you all an update on the 24-27 STIP planning for the pedestrian and bicycle strategic funding, which is the general term that we are using for the total $55 million in additional funding that was authorized by the Oregon Transportation Commission back in January of 2021. So this is the funding we were talking about before the new big federal infrastructure bill, is the 55 million. And we're just treating this as one big pot of 55 million with a $10 million target of the minimum amount we need to spend for projects that serve a safe routes to school goal on the state system as well. So we stood up this program last year with the goals of really focusing on the highest need locations first, and really rapidly had to pull together a initial project list to move forward through our scoping and selection processes at ODOT. And we did that with really an emphasis on where are the top 10% need locations on ODOT system based on the active transportation needs inventory. So that we made sure that we weren't just focusing on the largest urban areas. We also looked at places that were in the top 20% of needs in smaller communities under 5,000. And since that's still a pretty big pot of locations, and we needed those locations to have projects that we could get a scope developed for right away and get in through our process, we also really focused on where are places where we think we have cost-effective solutions that we can propose, where we have something that's already in the works. So it's got some project readiness benefits to it. We looked at where can we leverage other ODOT projects, particularly through our safety and our ADA programs, because we get way more bang for our buck wherever we can do those leverage opportunities. And And then we also looked at, for the standalone projects, where are the very, very highest needs on our system if we're going to look at a standalone project to scope for funding through this program. That effort resulted in a list of 38 projects all over the state. 8 of them were Safe Routes to School projects, specifically that we pulled from previous rounds of applications from the Safe Routes to School program that had not made the cut for funding, but were ready to move forward. And then 30 ped bike strategic projects that were mostly leverage, but then a handful of standalone projects at high priority locations as well. So that makes up what we refer to as our 150% list when we're talking. Luckily, with the help from this group and just some smart thinking with the internal team, we were able to advance 6 of those projects from 24-27 up to funding for 21-24 STIP. So 4 of those were through the SWIP strategic program that OBPAC helped identify the projects that move forward for that. And then 2 of them were projects where we had a 21-24 project in the STIP that we had really, really wanted to do some additional sidewalk infill and pedestrian and bicycle improvements as part of the project, but did not have the funding available. They were in high crash corridors in equity communities, and we were able to get authorization to move up and advance a small amount of those $24-27 that we were going to get to leverage those projects in 21-24. So that just helps us get more things on the ground earlier, helps us get more bang for our buck, especially given the current market conditions that I'm going to be talking about in just a little bit. So with those 38 projects that we identified and moved forward into the scoping process, we did quite a bit of public involvement through ongoing discussions with area commissions on transportation, our modal advisory committees, local communities, MPOs. And we also conducted an online open house that I think most of you had the opportunity to participate in last fall. We did some demographic questions just to get a baseline on who we're reaching with this effort. Really at this point that we're showing that we're kind of reaching the expected audience of more in the 40 to 60 years old range, predominantly white, and predominantly in a mid to higher income category. So that is definitely something we are going to use as a baseline and work to improve on in our future outreach efforts. But we did hear from 455 people, which is a pretty good response. 57% of whom were supportive of the projects we had on our list for a variety of reasons. The reasons that folks were not highly supportive of the project list, if they shared a reason, were primarily because they had other projects in their area that they thought were more important, or because there weren't any projects in their area on the list. We did give folks the opportunity to provide feedback on individual projects so that we could get more of a sense of what are the specific challenges that people are facing in those areas. So we got a sense of which projects had the most support just based on the folks we heard from. And we did get a lot of responses that gave us more information about specific challenges people were facing in our project areas that we were able to forward to our scoping teams to help inform that work. We also asked people what they would want to fund and prioritize funds for if more money became available. And that was a clear top 5 of physically separated bike lanes, more crossings, more sidewalks, more shared use paths, also support for more striped bike lanes. And so, like I said, we forwarded the information we got from that open house to our scoping team, so what could be incorporated into the project refinement. And of the 32 projects that we are now receiving back from our scoping teams in the regions, we are learning a lot. Leanne Ferguson and I are starting to dive into the detailed scoping notes and cost estimating tools that we're getting back from the teams. And an immediate thing that we have identified as a trend is that due to market changes and just the things that we learn when we go out to the field to start scoping projects, that our 150% list is looking like it is going to come back to us as more of a 300 to 400% list. What we submitted that was around $70 million has come back to us as more than $100 million is the post-scoping estimate. And that still does not include a large chunk of our ADA leverage projects that we anticipate getting back in April, because those are going through a slightly different scoping process with some external support. So big questions that are coming up with this is, why is this happening? And there are some trends that we are identifying through reviewing the cost estimating tools and the scoping notes. A big one just being the really rapid inflation and strains on the market that we've seen over the last year with COVID, supply shortages, all of that going on. That we don't know if it's going to continue. We hope it's not going to continue, but we need to account for some higher inflation rates in our estimates. The other things are stormwater triggers and things like right-of-way that we are triggering where we need to buy property to complete a sidewalk, or might not need to buy a property, but need to do a temporary easement to construct the improvement that we maybe didn't think we were going to need going in. And so those are really expensive processes once they're included in your project. And then just with the program focusing on those highest need locations, those are generally fairly dense urban environments, or even in the smaller communities that we're looking at, those under 5,000 population areas. There's generally some reason that we haven't gotten around to making an improvement in this location previously, because there is a building or a drainage ditch or something that is there that adds a complexity to the project, or just maybe there's a driveway that we need to deal with defining how that access is going to work for that business when we fill that sidewalk gap. And there is some inherent risk in any of those urban processes that mean that we have to hold a higher percentage of our construction estimate for more design time potentially, and just for a higher contingency amount. So that's the why. The what it means for, or as far as we know thus far, the what it means for the program and our next steps is that we are going to have to cut more, we're going to have more projects below the cut line than we initially thought that we were going to have when we make this refinement down to a 100% list of what we think we can actually fund with the 55 million we have available right now. And how we're going to do that over the next few months is Leanne and I have already started pulling together some of the data that we have for these projects. And that's looking at the active transportation needs inventory scores, the social equity transportation disadvantaged index scores, and doing some red flag review. Just there's some projects we've been able to say, you know, there were some changes to the scope of this project or some things that you included that really don't seem like they should be ped bike expenses. So we're either gonna need other people to come in and become funding partners to cover these other elements or take this project off the list. So that's our initial screen that we're working on right now. We're gonna ask the regions to tell us how would they rank and prioritize the projects that are in their areas. Going to meet with the other program managers just to talk about our priorities overlap and where can we bundle projects to get more savings. So say there's a project that is #1 on the ped bike list, but it's #3 on the safety list. Can we work together to meet in the middle somewhere? And then we're also going to be working with our risk assessment folks in our delivery and operations unit to start doing a programmatic level risk assessment and value engineering exercise so that we can look across all of the projects that we scoped and find, hey, these stormwater triggers are a huge schedule and budget risk on 75% of our projects. What are the ways that we can minimize that risk? What are the ways that we can look at maybe working with our partners at water quality organizations to get some programmatic design exceptions so that we can minimize that cost a little bit. That is what we're thinking of thus far. And the question that I want to pose to you all is, what other filters or lenses should we be looking at as we're embarking on this effort to transition from what may be a 300 to 400% project list to a ranked 100% list?
Thank you, Jessica. I'm personally not surprised by the inflation increases given the context I work in, and that's just happening across the board. So here we are having this conversation. Who would like to start us off? Any thoughts on other filters or lenses to apply in kind of narrowing this down to the actual available funding?
My first thought is, how are the other areas dealing with these same problems? I mean, are we looking at and trying to include projects that have already been kicked out due to other restraints around money? You know, because a lot of these were collaborative efforts, and if the other holders are going like, the price really went up, we need to, you know, I don't want to keep going after something that somebody else has already decided to kick to the curb. So that'd be the first spot I would look personally.
Yeah, that's going to be something that we are getting into with those discussions with the other funding program managers, because we have a significant portion of these projects that are really dependent upon leveraging another program to, you know, get more done. And if they're going to get cut off of the other programs list, we're probably not going to pursue them as standalone ped bike projects in most areas.
Other thoughts?
I have a question for clarification. First of all, I appreciate you bringing this to us, Jessica. I think it's a good topic for us to discuss. So you already used a pretty good process. I mean, I thought it seemed like a great process to get to what was considered the 150% list. But did that result in each project being kind of ranked, like what, like each one has its own unique kind of numeric rank? And oh, it didn't. Okay. So what, I'm sorry if I missed this, but so then what was the, what process were you anticipating using to get from the 150% list back when it was a 150% list to a final list?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what we had submitted initially is we asked the regions to, based on the criteria that we had of, you know, top 10% leverage opportunities, to really give us their top priority list, but we got that just as a package. It didn't say this is number 1, number 2, number 3. So that was something that we were planning on using as a filter when we got projects back from scoping. So what we were planning on using is pretty much what we've got here on the page already, of looking at the ATNI, looking at red flags, and having those discussions with the other program managers. The only new piece that we've identified so far is this programmatic risk assessment, which I think is going to be you know, my nerd heart is overflowing with excitement about about this exercise and getting into those details. So that's a really great resource that we've been given access to within the agency. So yeah, that part hasn't changed too much. It's just because of the scale of the difference that we have now, that it seems like we might want to try to find some more lenses to look at. The one that has come up in our internal conversations and this presentation, when I've given it to some other stakeholder groups like TPAC at Metro, was maybe some sort of cost benefit or return on investment lens. So we are going to have a conversation with our economists in April to talk about, is there some way we can do that with the data that we have? I mean, that's always the challenge with those sorts of lenses of, if we don't have, you know, specific counts or a specific way of estimating, if we build this, we will have this many more people who walk and bike in this area. It's a little hard. So hopefully they can come up with some clever tools for us to use for that sort of analysis.
Robert, you look very contemplative. Any suggestions based
I think
on?
I'm just squinting because I'm sitting in the sun, and I think my brow is furrowed because I'm trying to like block out some sun. But no, I guess I'm also contemplative. I haven't come up with any new thoughts that I'm ready to share yet. I'm still formulating, but thanks.
Good question. I have a clarification question, Jessica. I'm wondering how much weight was given to equity. So I'm thinking about, you know, 0 car households, low income, BIPOC census tracts in the initial selection strategy, or might that be dialed up more to kind of differentiate, to narrow the lists?
I think that could be dialed up more. There were a few scenarios in the initial cut where it's, are we going to do this project or this project, that are both top 5% scoring ATNI locations, and we relied on that equity index to say, okay, this one is the one that we're going to move forward with. So we can kind of crank that up again.
Yeah, that is actually the question I was trying to formulate. And not only did Emma beat me to it, but she made it a much more succinct question than I would have. But I like that idea. Just want to second that.
Thanks, Robert. I'm glad we got some teamwork going on here. Another clarifying. Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious if Bill has thoughts on how Oberstar's office would go about prioritizing project lists like this?
I'd say we were nowhere near as sophisticated as you in prioritizing projects. We relied on a system of input from our constituents. I'm impressed with your prioritization project or process.
Are we still looking at funding fewer projects with better results over giving less funding to more projects? And can we do a higher match rate to any of them so that people can have the option of getting their project put through?
That's a really good question. On the match side, this is federal funds going onto the ODOT system, so the match doesn't work quite like if we were talking about the Safe Routes to School or the Community Power program. So I don't think that is a lever we have to work with in this, but the more to fewer projects versus less to, to more broad systemic projects is a good question. And I think that I'm hoping that the risk assessment will help us with some of that. Are there some things that are in these estimates that are kind of like the gold-plated bring everything to standard when there is more of a incremental improvement that we could make will help us, as well as some of this cost benefits analysis that the economists might be able to help us with. But I'd love to hear more on which direction do you think we should be going first off, and how do we tell one from the other?
Well, I definitely think we shouldn't be cutting corners on any project at all. So yeah, it makes it difficult to have to take things away from people. That's why I was wondering if there was a way we could come up with additional funding from somewhere that could help supplement these projects. But I don't know if that's an option or not. Just a thought.
And that is the other question that is left out there right now. And I stopped sharing my screen.
I think that's okay. We can see each other for discussion.
Okay. But there is still a possibility that we could get some additional funding to increase that 55 million that we have from the IIJA federal funds that Kaz was talking about. We just won't know what that looks like until the end of March when OTC makes their decision, and probably even a little later than that, because OTC will make the decision on the scenario. And then there's discussion about, the smaller subdivisions of funding to specific programs within those scenarios. So what we're hoping to do is get a ranked project list so that no matter what happens with funding, we can just adjust where that cut line is appropriately.
Based on schedule, where will this be at our May meeting? Like, do you need all the input from us today because we're going to be doing the work between now and May, or is there anything left to discuss in May?
So the goal right now is to do the work between now and May so that we have a draft list ready to share with you at your next meeting. I believe July is when those draft lists need to go back to OTC in the overall STIP development process. So it will not be a set in stone list when you get back together in May. We'll also hopefully have a bit more to share about some of the lessons learned from the very initial look at the cost estimating tool and risk registers from our projects with that risk assessment. So yeah, that's where we're at schedule-wise.
That's good. And my additional clarification question earlier is, I see some safe routes to school oriented projects in here. I understand that the funding is lumped together, but given that the IIJA scenarios being discussed by the OTC include increases to safe routes to school, is that applicable to the state system, which all these projects would be on the state system? Like if that increases via IIJA, would one lens we might want to consider be, okay, well, safe routes is being funded with this increase. Maybe we focus on other areas that don't have funding available through this funding source.
Yeah, that is a possible lens. What we labeled as safe routes to school projects in the 150% list summary slide there, we only considered things that had actually been safe routes to school applications in the past in that list. We do have projects in the Ped Bike strategic list that they weren't previous safe routes to school applications, but part of the reason that they are on the Ped Bike strategic list is because they help improve access and safety near a school, particularly in some smaller communities. So we could do some filtering around, is it safe routes eligible or is it not?
I would suggest considering that as a potential lens, because I think are lacking resources in some of the areas that don't have a specific program, and this Ped Bike strategic funding in my mind is to fill in like the best use of the dollars to improve walking and biking in the state. And so not having to fulfill that SRTS piece when there's other funds could be one way to help narrow it. As we look to wrap up this item, any other thoughts, lenses to consider?
One to put out there that I'm curious this group's thoughts on is, with the Ped Bike strategic program, we do not have region targets for funding. That was part of the deciding to go with the highest need locations first. So we're still not going to be looking at any sort of X% goes to each region. One thing that has been brought up as a question of a potential lens to use is, do we want to have some sort of cap on no region will get more than X% of the overall fund? I asked this question, of course, not yet having run the numbers on what the distribution of our funding looks like from that full list of projects that we got back from scoping, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Who's got thoughts? I see Robert and Mavis coming forward. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? We'll make a little queue. Okay,
I
Robert
would.
and
Oh,
Mavis.
go ahead, Robert.
Oh, you can go.
Oh, I like to see a cap because I know when you look at numbers and a few other these things, the focus point of people is going to suck in a lot of money, and there's only a couple regions with a lot of people, and so I would be afraid that like region 1 and 2 is going to have all the funds in the end, and that would make me sad. Next.
It just seems to me like putting a cap on the amount each region could get would basically be the same as having I mean, you essentially are setting the allocation. You're setting a limit for a region. So I guess that's sort of a compromise from actually having a set amount from the outset that each region is going to receive. But I don't know. I think that you should let whatever criteria you set up, I think you should let the criteria kind of drive the process and determine where the funding goes, which projects get funded.
I agree with Robert too. I think that it might be a little more advantageous just to focus on seeing what the high needs areas are, just because I feel like those will be the ones that have the most impact instead of focusing on specific regions.
Lauren, Bill, any thoughts on cap, no cap?
I'm kind of in the Bill camp as well. I know there's some areas that are just more active. I'd like to see too how much work and interest the regions themselves put into these issues, and I know that with some monies, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. It's like, I'd like to sort of see what that analysis looks like. Are they really interested in helping themselves and not just getting the handouts? But I don't know if a cap is necessary if they do meet the criteria.
Bill, would you like to share any thoughts on cap, no cap?
Tough question. Almost hate to commit to no cap, because that takes away a lot from the rural districts, but you'll make the right decision at the right time. We'll make the right decision at the right time.
Well, what I'm hearing from the group is it's not a tool that there is interest in considering. So unless and until we get to a point where there is some data showing that there is some sort of definite skew and issue that needs to be addressed. So, which we don't have at this point. So
well put.
Okay.
And Jessica, I was thinking the flip on the cap, you could maybe have a minimum floor saying maybe every region gets a project. I don't know how many projects there are in the available funding, but if the desire is to really focus on the criteria, fund the best projects, but also have some staff delivering projects of this kind in every area in the state, so that those regions are thinking, oh yeah, that's an opportunity. That's a thing we can think of in the future. That's part of our toolbox. We're familiar. It's not this foreign thing that we occasionally engage with or not. That might be kind of an alternative to a cap and just having like a minimum of one project in every region. And other than that, going after the best scoring based on the criteria.
All right, well, I've kept you over time again. So thank you very much for the feedback. I really appreciate it. It's a good and hard position to be in, of lots of good projects to choose from. So we'll be reporting back next time you meet.
Thank you. With that, let's take a brief break until 3:30. And then we'll shorten up the Oregon Community Paths update and Division Administrator update a little bit. They're simply in form, and I really do want to have some time for the member roundtable. So we will be starting that before the end of the meeting, hopefully 15 minutes dedicated to that. Have a good 5-minute break. See everyone at 3:30. Wonderful.
There we go. I had to unmute. Hi, everyone. Alan Thompson. I'm the Community Pass Program Manager. And I'm going to get this thing to go through. Excuse me, I need to minimize everyone else on here. There we go. All right. So these are just some changes from the last time that we talked about the program. So I'm just going to highlight the changes. As you know, that the program is a biennial grant program. It's every 2 years. Because we had so much demand, we had originally in the last cycle, we only had $8.2 million. So for the 24-27 STIP, we bumped it up to $36 million, broken out into 2 solicitations, 18 million for the 2022 solicitation and 18 million for the 2024 solicitation. Just found out that we're proposing just under $28 million in IIGA funds. We're splitting that in almost in half, 11.9 million in the 2022 solicitation, bringing this upcoming solicitation to almost $30 million, and $27 million in the 2024 solicitation. Now, all these are federal dollars, and so for the 2022 solicitation, nonprofits are ineligible because in general, they're not eligible for federal funds. We're rebuilding the state funds for 2024. We think we'll have about $3 to $4 million estimated for cash on hand by the time we're ready for that solicitation. Project refinement, we finalized our numbers. We have 150,000 to 750,000 per project and a minimum of $3 million dedicated to project refinement. That can go up based upon merit, but we have the floor is $3 million. We increased it to 150,000 to account that it's a federal grant, and for the majority of applicants that are not certified to handle federal FHWA projects, there was the ODOT overhead. There's also the administrative cost of handling a federal grant. So we took it up from 75,000 minimum to 150,000. And the same with construction, because once you get into the federal program, you have NEPA and National Environmental Protection Act, and you also have various requirements for the planning and engineering. So we bumped that up from 200,000 to 500,000 for federal grants, and we also increased the top ceiling from $4 million to $6 million to help account for all of that as well. We have website updates as of this morning. We have our guidelines on the webpage for the 2022 solicitations, our webinar dates and how to register. The FAQ, we always update the FAQs for each one to make it answer all the easy questions for new applicants. For this time, even though the solicitation starts in August, we already have the pre-application sample worksheets for both project refinement and construction on the webpage for applicants to start perusing through, ask questions, and start planning for how they want to set up their applications. And the one thing that's still remaining is we recorded the March 17th webinar, and we're trying to get that posted. That should be coming up fairly quickly. And the next 2 webinars are April 14th and May 18th. And again, we have everything on the webpage. And that is it. Oh, I'm sorry. And of course, the schedule, August 1st are pre-applications through September 15th. We're going to review the pre-applications by September 30th and let everyone know, and start accepting applications in November through January 31st. And one thing that we are going to do is we're going to take the top projects and start doing some internal scoping. As Jessica had mentioned earlier, that the 100% list became much shorter in terms of the number of projects based upon the increased costs after ODOT did this internal scoping. We did have some issues with some projects where we've had to look at their potentially downscoping the project or canceling it based upon that they underscoped the project. So we're looking at fixing that issue based upon the lessons learned from the last cycle. And so that's going to take a little while. We hope to get it to the OBPAC in May and then to the OTC in July of 2023, with the project executions at the beginning of the federal fiscal year in October of 2023. And that's it. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Well done. Thank you, Alan. I was going to suggest 5 minutes and you did it. You covered a lot of ground. Any questions for Alan before we move on to the ODOT administrator, division administrator update? Seemed quite thorough.
All right.
Moving along.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, Karen.
Hello, everyone. Again, well, not again, but apologies for missing the first part of your meeting. I had an agency executive leadership team meeting that conflict that came up. Let's see, we should very soon, like imminently, be able to announce who the new policy and implementation manager is. I know we were hopeful to be able to do it today, but we're not quite there yet. Maybe I could just hint that I think you'll be pleased at the announcement and call it that. And then I wanted to share with you, we're also really close on our passenger rail. Yes, thank you, Jessica. On our passenger rail manager position. That's a position that Jen Sellers used to hold, and Kathy Holmes has been in that position as an interim. So that will be, I think, another important announcement, because, you know, passenger rail is good for Oregon. And then the other thing I wanted to draw people's attention to, if you didn't, I think it's a program analyst 1 position, Jessica. That position is still open, correct? Out for recruitment. And that's a position that would support, and Jessica, correct me if I get any of this wrong, would support Jessica and Leanne so that they are not having to do as much soup to nuts they get to spend more of their time on the brain, not that you don't need brains for all the other works, but the policy and strategic investment components. I can't speak, it's been a long day. I had the rail advisory committee meeting this morning too, so feel sadness for me. I've had to use my brain all day long. Anyways, so that position is a really important support position that will be helpful to Jessica and Leanne in particular, with some of the coordinator elements and components of their programs. So that's on the streets right now. Another position that's available that I'm really interested in filling with quality candidate, not that I don't want quality candidates in all of my positions, is we have the program services manager position in the public transportation division is also open. So that position is responsible for supervisory management oversight of the division's budget, of our grant administration components of our grant programs, our compliance oversight programs with the transit programs, our state management reviews. So when the FTA reviews us, which is currently happening, and also some of the repositories where we have our policy and procedures for the division. And that position and that person would be part of the division's management and leadership team. So it's working hand in hand with our strategic investment, our implementation folks, as well as the rail and multimodal network folks. So it's a pretty important management position for us as well. I think those are the main things that I wanted to share, bring to attention position-wise. And then Region 1 is also looking for the next active transportation liaison. So another important position. Region 5, I don't think it's posted yet, but we are going to be looking for our next regional transit coordinator. And so if you're out on the east side and you know good folks, have them be on the lookout for that position. And Arla Miller has been backfilling and helping with that position for a very long year plus. Frank Thomas was recently named our network manager, and I think I'm probably getting that title somewhat wrong. And of course, invite Marcia to step in and correct any and all errors.
Yeah, Frank's network program manager, and he'll be relocating to Salem, which is why the Region 5 transit coordinator position is opening up, which is exciting. We have posted it can be located anywhere in Region 5. Prior, Frank was located in LeGrand. We're opening it up to try and get the best candidate pool possible to any location in Eastern Oregon, basically.
Yeah, Frank's amazing, Mavis, isn't he? I know. Sorry, not sorry, but I'm looking forward to having his energy in the office here in Salem and getting him, continuing to apply his skills to the entire network. I think it's been a tough time, trying to cut through the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, figuring out what the next evolution of a hybrid, remote work or in the office environment or 100%, remote work. But I'm excited about the things that are ahead of us. The other, as a division, there's one other thing that I want to flag. It's not a staffing update, but one of the things that was raised, and if you've covered this already, did we, in the IIJA update, did Kaz talk about the innovative mobility
We had
program?
a brief overview on that. Yeah, so I think we are up to
Fabulous.
speed. Thank you.
And I will not bore you. I am done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's clearly a lot of opportunity and turnover. And so the more that we can help push these positions out to people who might be interested, the better. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Karen actually left out 3 other postings we have. So we have lots. We have like 13 vacancies right now. So if you know folks who are interested in active or public transportation, please point them their way. We have 2 entry-level positions for program assistant help. We have a public transportation compliance coordinator position that's going to be opening up. So like I say, we have, I don't know, between 10 and 13 positions that are, some of which are going to be announced pretty quickly, but the rest are all open and we're looking for candidates. So please use
Aaron, aren't you about graduating from college? Don't you need a job? Don't you want to come work with us?
Still got another year, unfortunately.
Oh, well, you can do both at the same time. It's fine. Lots of people do it. It's no problem.
Well, thank you for those updates. And I want to say thank you to Marcia for all the work and service that you have provided to the state, given that you will be retired or moving on in some capacity before our next meeting. So thank you for that. Appreciate those updates. We have made it to member roundtable, not on agenda items, which I am thrilled about because this is in my heart, like one of my favorite parts of the agenda that sometimes gets skipped over. So a brief update, the outreach work group will be meeting on April 4th from 2 to 3:15. Erin's going to send out the invitation with a Zoom link for that, including Jessica and Kaz. We'll convene, figure out the logistics and get the next gathering of Bike Ped Act representatives together end of April / maybe beginning of May. I wanted to take a moment to look at our upcoming agenda. So at the bottom of today's agenda, there are future agenda build items listed. For May, right now, we have prep for July OTC update on public transportation division advisory committees. I'm also seeing on the annual recurring that the MAC follow-up would be in May. So I want to note that. And then I also looked back in my notes and we have an annual meeting with the ODOT director, and we have intention to meet with other ODOT leadership. ODOT Director Strickler last came to OBPAC a year ago, almost the day, a couple days off in March of 2021. So Jessica, I'm wondering if we might be able to meet with the director in May for our virtual meeting.
I have that on the list that I'm looking at in the drive, and I'm wondering if I updated the link to the agenda build at the bottom of the agenda, and if it's the old 2021 agenda build that.
I think it might be old.
Okay, let me put the link in the chat for you all real quick too.
It sounds like that's in the works to invite the director to come meet with us again.
It is on the agenda build. I have not started the wheels moving.
Perfect. This looks more complete. Thank you. Anything else that folks would like to see on future agendas that are not reflected on the link that Jessica just sent?
I actually have to check whether or not the PTD advisory committee's item ended up on the July OTC agenda build with Karen and Marcia afterward.
Okay. And I think it would be helpful in July, since we've determined we'll be in person. I would love to revisit the work plan at that point. I think that's really an activity that's conducive to meeting in person. Let's add that in there. And this is a work in progress. Just wanted to put the call out. Anyone have ideas at this point?
I'm looking for I want something with teeth. So when people don't follow like the bud or whatever, what are the repercussions of that? How are we? I mean, so people keep talking about this whole system planning and how we need to make it like, okay, we need to admit that we don't have a whole system. How do we make it in their best interest to play nice? I don't know how to.
I see what you're getting at, Mavis. I wonder if the BUD report to the legislature that's scheduled for July may get a piece of that, kind of reporting on how is it being implemented? Is it being implemented? And then also the highway design manual with the invitation to be reviewing those exceptions with the updated language. Is there something more that we could add beyond those two items that kind of gets at what you're asking for?
I mean, the short answer.
Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. If I understood the comment correctly, I think the short answer is, if it's how do we make sure ODOT does certain things, it's through statute. It's through the legislature telling us thou shalt. So we can have things that are like the blueprint for urban design that are our standards and things that we are trying to accomplish. But if we're also balancing other considerations, then that's left to, I guess, professional judgment, among other factors. So I'm not sure if I'm specifically addressing what you were saying, though.
I'm wanting to address this whole idea of whole system planning because it's coming up with our
The OTP.
Yeah, it's coming up with the OTP, and so it sounds wonderful. I would love it to be like a whole system, and I'm just, how's that being addressed? How's that moving forward?
Oh, from that perspective, it's around the specific policy language that's in the OTP. And I think as the policy advisory committee gets into the trade-off conversations, because we all know there's not enough funding to do all the things. So when you get into those trade-off conversations where that committee is landing with their recommendations ultimately to the commission about certain priorities and the things that take priorities when we're doing those considerations. I hope that's.
I just want to position ourselves to be in an area to say, hey, when we're looking at this complete community and how it should look, I want us in the forefront. I want us to be a solid consideration instead of a second thought. So how do we position ourselves to be there? And this may not be an agenda building. I'm kind of throwing this out towards you, Jessica, because I don't know. That's just what I want to see.
Yeah, I think that we've got things on the work plan and on the agenda that are kind of coming at it from a lot of different directions, which is good. So your OTP updates, the highway design manual update that we've been talking about, that really is the BUD becomes is getting incorporated into the highway design manual in this process. And when it's in the highway design manual, you have to get a design exception that gets signed off on by the folks up here if you're not going to do follow that guidance or follow those standards. So I think that's a big piece of it. The one thing that I had written down there's a couple things I'd written down when folks were sharing, what motivates them at the committee as potential things to talk about is one is there has been a pretty big effort underway with the Department of Land Conservation and Development to update the transportation planning rules. They're calling it the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking that has a lot to do with land use, but then also a lot about that whole system planning and what sort of system are we planning for. So I'm wondering, would the group be interested in trying to have someone from our planning and climate office or from DLCD come to just give an overview of what changes are being proposed through that effort and how it might tie into your work plan?
As someone who's served on the rulemaking committee representing the city, I'm just looking at the schedule, seeing that the anticipated adoption would be May 19th, 20th in front of the Land Conservation Development Commission. So that would be prior to our May 24th next meeting. I think at some point it would be good for this group to get an update and understand how transportation planning rules are changing in the state. But I don't know with the sequencing if we'll actually have opportunity for input. So let's pencil it in, but recognize we might want to shift the timing depending on the adoption process.
And what do you think, Robert? I see this as something that is near and dear to your heart with the land planning.
Yeah, you know me well. No, I do find it interesting. I mean, I guess I didn't speak up immediately just because seems like there's always there are always more potential agenda items than there is time, but I'd be interested.
I'll put it on to think about for May. Maybe it's something to move to July when we know more about what actually gets passed. Or it sounds like it would mostly be an informative agenda item, so it's something that could be on when we've got time, try to squeeze in something. The other item was around our transportation options program that was referenced a couple times by Kaz and Karen with that innovative mobility pilot proposal I don't know that we've had Stephanie Millar, who is our transportation options program manager, come to this group and kind of share with you all what we're currently doing with our existing program there and what resources might be available to the committee and the communities you work with.
That would relate to kind of e-bikes and micro-mobility, bike share expansion, a few items that have been on our work plan. So again, I think we should put that on the optional list. And then as we're developing the May agenda, I think there's some timely things that need to happen in May. And then in July, when we meet in person, we'll kind of be able to look at our work plan, say, here's all the different opportunities, what's really most important to us, and focus in on that. Unless there are any other agenda build items, I would like to open it up for just committee members to share any information that might be of interest to other committee members. I'll start off by putting a link in the chat about the Oregon Scenic Bikeway Program. It's transitioning to be housed in Cycle Oregon, and they're seeking new members for the Route Advisory Committee that's being reestablished. So that exists. If you know others who would be interested, feel free to pass it along. Does anyone else have updates related OBPAC items?
I wanted to mention just briefly, I know I kind of mentioned the improvements that are happening on OR 99. And I actually came home for spring break and saw that they're already starting some of the water line replacements and making the bridge over Coleman Creek. So those are underway, and it's already pretty cool to see like stuff going on. And they've already started kind of guiding the road a little bit. Instead of 4 lanes, it's 2 now. So it's really great to kind of see more space for pedestrians and bikes on the road.
Thanks, Aaron. Good update. Any other items of interest to the group anyone wants to share?
Has it previously been shared with the group, Jessica, that PTAC is looking at creating a bike ped liaison position to the Public Transportation Advisory Committee? They're looking at doing that with multiple modal advisory committees to have that better multimodal coordination, cross-pollination on their committee. Has that been, it's not final yet, at least I don't think. Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong once again. PTAC did PTAC approve the, no, they're still under discussion.
They postponed it till May.
Right, okay. But that was not a topic that had received any preliminary reservations about it. That is not one of the things that they're still talking about. So that will likely be potentially a formal question that comes to this group, I think, as to whether a member of this group wants to come and be like the OBPAC representative on PTAC. So something to keep in mind.
Can we recruit one of them to come to OBPAC meetings?
Well, if you're looking at expanding your membership and composition, why, yes, I think you can.
So one thing related to that, I was just in the process of writing up an email to Emma and you, Karen. I did get a chance to reach out to someone in our government affairs unit about, there was the question that came up at the last meeting about, are there other governor appointed committees that have non-voting members on subcommittees or that regularly participate in meetings? And there are a couple of examples of that, like the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI and the Motorcycle Safety Committee have a model where they have the smaller group of appointed voting members, but they've got a couple of designated liaisons who come to meetings and will give a quick update or maybe a brief presentation on a particular topic. So they're in the loop on the committee's overall business, but they're pretty much just a update and presentation role and not a voting member participating in a lot of the debate.
Thank you.
So that seems unfortunate. It seems like they're missing out on some amazing opportunities at that cross-pollination and information exchange.
I think there's an opportunity there. I think if we can have non-members on subcommittees, we could, for instance, have a PTAC member who is engaged with some of the outreach to the bike ped active transportation reps on the ACTs and the local bike ped advisory committees. Like there's a lot of logical collaboration opportunities that would be worth exploring more. So put it out to the committee. Any last thoughts, things that you'd love to share with this group?
In my talking with the people that acts, I got 2 recommendations for land use employees that might be interested in serving on this committee. So I'll send those to you, Emma and Jessica, that information.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Lauren, for all your work on that. And I really appreciate everyone sharing earlier what's kind of brought you to OBPAC. And I look forward to carrying that little spark forward into the next few meetings as we figure out where we're headed from here. Have a great afternoon and enjoy your 1 minute early end of the meeting.
Emma, thank you so much for sharing today. Great job.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Emma.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.